Guten Tag, mein Name ist Clara Maveli.
Hello, I'm Clara Mavelia, and I head the Cultural Entrepreneurship Institute in Berlin. Today we're in Frankfurt, and my guest is Chris Bors, manager of the company Arago. He's an expert in artificial intelligence. Welcome, Mr. Bors. Hello. Nice to be here in your company, Mr. Bors. Would you like to introduce yourself personally? Yes, welcome to Arago. My name is Chris Bors. About 21 years ago, we founded this company. For 17 years, nobody really paid much attention to what we were doing, and then suddenly everyone's talking about it. It's an exciting period for us. You are a celebrated entrepreneur. We're talking about today now. You are a sought-after speaker. Why are you so successful now? I think the interesting thing is that we are very credible because we spent such a long time getting it right. We're not an overnight wonder. Something works and then we flog it to death until it falls. No, we worked a long time on it and now we feel ready to go out with it. And it's not a matter of just playing with a little gadget or something. We can present credibly what a past record we have. All right, well, let's look at that past record. How did it all begin? What inspired you? Why were you interested in this? What made you hit upon the idea of founding Arago? It was really a question of doing something interesting. To me, something interesting was always research, discover something, understand something difficult. But I worked out that it's very difficult these days to do research in a research environment because you don't actually have the time to spend long enough on the theme. So I thought about how to go about it and thought the best way is to found a company, because as long as you have a part of the company that's earning money, you can research as long as you want until you're ready. So we had to do that. So from 1995 until 2008, we worked on the principles. And in 2008, the basic solution was working and we started to look about where we wanted to implement, we tested. And when we felt sure that it was going to work, when we were quite sure how we wanted to make this technology available, we started to scale up. And since then, we've been looking at wider coverage and more visibility. Okay, well, let's start with the fundamentals. What does artificial intelligence mean? Okay, well, there are various definitions for it. Probably it's a bit like the Industrial Revolution. Nobody really knows what it is, at least there's no mathematical definition for it. Nowadays, anything that contains statistics somehow is called artificial intelligence because that's a buzzword, it's easy to market. I don't think it's quite right, but anyone who spends longer working on this finds this, they're a bit uneasy with this. But of course you've got strong AI now, you've got something which really behaves like a human being. This is what comes up in science fiction and what they discuss in debates about ethics. But I can reassure you, nobody knows how to build that kind of thing. We don't even understand how human beings work, let alone be able to replicate them. We're a long way removed from that technologically. We aren't anywhere near it. And even if we did know how to do it, would we have the power to do it is the first question. I think the best thing we can do now is to create a general artificial intelligence which can simply handle any kind of task. So something to help people and make life easier, basically. Well, I think that should always be the objective. I don't think you'll find anybody who builds a machine to replace people. But that's what people are scared of. They're scared of these cold machines that are going to start ruling the world. Why do people think that? Well, in science fiction, a book where the world is entirely intact doesn't sell well. That's not a story. This inherent fear of machines, this difference between humans and machines is a good basis for telling horror stories. That's been the case in recent years, that we've only heard negative stories about artificial intelligence, and that's got stuck in people's heads. But I don't think that's real, either in terms of what's technically possible or in terms of where it's meaningful to do it. I think artificial intelligence will bring a huge transformation simply because a lot of the work that we do now can be done by machines. And so you have to ask yourself, also in terms of humanism, are people doing the work now that they should be doing, that they want to do? And I think that's the more interesting part of the discussion. Of course, we can talk about work, and that would bring us on to basic income and this idea that people would be able to devote themselves to things that are good for them or interest them. That would facilitate a new renaissance. The kind of thing 100 years ago they meant when they taught everyone to read and write. It would be similar now, that we could get away from mindless work, and who knows where that would lead us. What do you think? Perhaps we have to look at it this way. I think ever since we began with industrialization, if not before, probably when manufacture began, we have made more and more people work like machines. We've predefined their work, limited it, told them exactly what they've got to do, and reduced that. So ever since we started building factories, people have been doing these very mindless things that industrial robots can now replace them at. But if you look at office work these days, a lot of office work is nothing but a kind of predefined factory process. People know how to deduce facts, they know how to formulate, how to communicate. But apart from that, the processes they're engaged in are very much predefined. They are business processes. And I think we've been working for about 2 centuries on implementing processes, making sure that everything runs around processes. And if you look, processes are just badly written programs. If you look at a business process diagram and compare it with a flow chart from the 1980s, you'll see they look very similar. So, to boil that down, for 200 years we've been working on making human work as machine-based or machine-like as possible. Now we've got to the point where machines can do that. I think it's a good thing, because a lot of people aren't really happy doing what they do. In especially the developed societies where most of the work gets done, depression is epidemic. And there must be a reason for that. I don't think that people were born to do work that machines can do. Look at the station in the morning when the train comes in and spits out hundreds of people. They're not happy. That's true, yes. So most of this is work that doesn't require thought, where you don't need your brain properly. Well, you need the brain. That's why machines aren't doing it, because there are skills that classic industrial machines can't do very well, and that's where artificial intelligence comes into it. But it's the same principle. Basically, our education system was set up so that people don't go mad in factories. Now they're going mad in offices. But as you were saying, it is the case that these industrial robots exist now. This automation in factories has been around for some time. So now that we can start moving out of the factories, and these robots are becoming more anthropomorphic, there's more focus on the fears. I think the fears were always there. When the first industrial machines came along, those industrial looms, there were the Luddites that took them over and were completely opposed to them. And then when the industrial robots came along, the trade unions were opposed. And then it was data processing, and again, people were scared of it. And we're simply moving up levels all the time. I think the time has come to think fundamentally about what people ought to be doing or what they want to be doing. So, as you said, in philosophy as well, you say, well, with any technology since the Industrial Revolution, you can either be alarmist about it or euphoric. Where do you stand on that spectrum? I think I'm realistic. As a technician, a technological person, I suppose I'm more euphoric because I say this is fantastic, but I'm also a bit alarmist because I say we need to be careful that these changes don't outpace us. So I think I can safely say I'm a realist in this matter. I think on the one hand, this replacement of jobs, that will happen. That's very real. People who go around saying we're not going to have any jobs in future, I think that's the wrong conclusion because they're working on a basic assumption which says that if all the work we do now is given to machines, we'll all be unemployed. And the basic assumption there is that we are doing everything that we need to do or that we should be doing or that we would like to be doing. If I look out, 100 things occur to me that we should be doing too, that we don't have time to do. And if you read the news and look at what's happening and what's needed all around the world, I think you'd have to be pretty weird to think that we're already doing all the things we need to. Oh, yes, I'm sure about that. So it would be a wonderful thing if our life, if our prosperity, our society could be kept the way they are, but we finally had time to do the things we don't do yet. Jaron Lanier says that in the internet we are consumers of data rather than producers of data, and these big companies should at least pay us a percentage for the data we also produce so that we can preserve the middle class. What do you think about that? Because I'm sorry, but Facebook and so forth, without our data, without our profiles, they would vanish. Yes, although I think that's slightly unfair because these companies also give us something for free, don't they? It's not the case that they just get our data and we don't get anything, and they make a profit with our data, but they get our data because we want to use a service and no one wants to pay for it. I go to Facebook because I want to be famous among my friends for 5 minutes, and they get my data in return. It's an exchange. You have to decide whether you want that exchange. And I think people have reached the age of consent. They know what they want. Might be wrong about that, but I think so. A lot of people want that barter. And so you can't really blame Facebook for that. It's like when you hear that the Facebook algorithm is dangerous during elections and things. I'm sorry, if we remember the Labour movement, when we didn't have Facebook, they would print leaflets and distribute them. And they certainly didn't distribute them to the fat cats because they knew that they wouldn't read their leaflets. That was the Facebook algorithm analog. People have always done this. We've simply speeded it up. But basically, it only does what we want it to do. People are behind this. We have the responsibility for it. I think the danger is a quite different one. The actual difficulty we have these days is that we have an established economy and we all live relatively well off it, at least in these developed countries. Just imagine what level we are complaining at here. And this economy is now under threat from these new technologies because the new technologies, if it comes to the crunch, could replace large sections of the economy. Look at driverless cars, for example. If I've got driverless cars, I need about 75% fewer cars. That's not very good for those who own the car building industry because the rest of industry depends on them too. And if you want to do something good for humanity, by making driverless cars, you'll have fewer accidents. You can save a lot of distance, therefore a lot of resources. The city won't be so full. Transport will be 90% cheaper, so a lot of people can get to a lot more places. These are all good things. So the complaint can only be, we don't want you to ruin our economic sector. And that's why we are clinging to old things which maybe aren't such good things. I think the right way would be the escape is forwards. Of course, there are things in the internet, in economic terms, which are tending to go in a direction which is threatening. For example, people who work freelance on the internet, there's this portal Upwork, where people can basically sell their labor anywhere in the world. And then, of course, they don't pay their social insurance, they are missed out by all the public agencies. But that's a social issue, isn't it? The social question is, are people egoists? Do they optimize their own income? Or are people ready and willing to do something for the society they live in by paying it a bit of their income so that we can maintain the services and the other things we want? I think that's about responsibility. It's not a technical issue. If everyone optimizes their tax to the point that no one pays any anymore, then the state can't finance these things. This is the problem with journalism and other such professions, that they are worth less these days because people are used to get information free. No, I don't believe that. I think what I say is what we have, our existing economy, is a relatively well-functioning system. And now this system is facing pressure. It's not facing pressure because greedy entrepreneurs have put it under pressure, but because consumers are putting it under pressure. And maybe that's the difference between this fourth industrial revolution and all the previous ones, because in the past it was about more efficiency. This time it's consumers who've triggered it because they want things to be more convenient. Consumers have started using Airbnb and Uber and Google and Facebook and Amazon because it's much more comfortable. It's not the case that these companies provoked it. And that's a big difference, I think, because we've triggered it ourselves. And now, of course, we're startled about it. Yes, Airbnb is to be prohibited in parts of Germany because you can't find affordable flats in urban areas anymore. Yes, so we prohibit the platform instead of teaching people to behave properly. This is a human decision. If someone says, I'm going to optimize only my income by using my flat and renting it out overnight rather than renting it to somebody by the month, then where's the sense of responsibility? And that brings us back to philosophy, doesn't it, and ethics. Yes, that's what it's all about. That's the problem with any technology. You need an ethical regulation. Yes, but it's not a technical problem, it's a human problem. And technology exacerbates or reinforces human problems. So I would turn the whole thing round. I think that we need actively to explore how we can introduce new things faster and get rid of old things faster. One of our biggest social problems is that people always think they're losing something, but that's never happened. It's never held up in the long term. For example, that there are fewer jobs or more hungry people or whatever. Things have got better and better. The past tells us that things get better. And whenever things change, people say, but I'm sure this time it's not going to get better. But then it gets better. So the real question is, how can we make it easier to reverse the thought process? Here's an example. No, maybe let me explain a bit more about artificial intelligence before I get down to examples, because then we'll understand the example better. I think that artificial intelligence actually should be used throughout our established economy, because it thinks it's facing new competition against people who offer better services for consumers. People don't use Amazon because it's bad, but because it's good, or at least comfortable, depending how you want to describe it. And the question is, how can you compete with that if you're part of this established economic system? And there are only 3 ways to do that, only 3 ways to survive as an established company. And there's only one way to actually compete. If you just want to survive, there are 3 things you need to do. Firstly, you need to have a good brand. B, you need to be innovative. And C, you need to offer super service. Those 3 things all cost money. If you had a machine that could do a lot of the work that can be done today, but much cheaper, then you'll have the money to invest in those 3 things. And now something interesting. Brands are very human, innovation is very human, and service is very human. So you'd be investing entirely with this money that is released by replacing the people in those jobs with machines in those jobs. You'd be able to invest that money in people. If you don't just want to survive but actually become competitive, you need a new business model. And our business model today in the established economy, the management theory we learn is always linear, 5% growth every year. And other business models, you just mentioned Jay Lanier, and he demonstrates this very well, are exponential progression paths. And if you have an exponential model competing with a linear one, the exponential is bound to win because people ignore things until it's too late and then their line is over. So if you want to enter into that competition and not just be a supplier, you need an exponential model yourself. It doesn't have to be a worldwide thing, it doesn't have to be global, you don't have to offer everything, it's enough to have a little niche, but be number one. That develops completely new systems. You get oligopolies in those little niches, but the niches get smaller and smaller. That would be an interesting PhD for an economist. And the question is, how does an ordinary company that wants to invest in brands, innovation and service do that if it's not going to invest its money into this new business model? Either you can close down the company and start a new one, that's the startup mentality, close the old, start the new, or you get an opportunity to rethink your company, and you can only do that if you can free up money to pay for something, and that's where artificial intelligence comes in. That's the driving force there. If a lot of the work that is currently done in a process, if that is handed over to a machine, you get the time and you get the people freed up to invest in these other things. And I think that's really positive because suddenly you don't have to wait until you're attacked from someone who's more powerful than you, but you take control of it yourself. And let me now come on to what I actually wanted to say. I think the difficulties that we see now with the perception that we have, we caused ourselves those problems about 30 years ago. 30 years ago, when we told miners and steel workers that we would always need the steel industry and the mining industry. And we knew very well that that wasn't going to be an issue because we'd be able to get these things much cheaper and much better elsewhere. But we lied to people. If we told them the truth back then, if we'd said, listen, this is going to migrate these jobs, then these days we wouldn't have people frustrated. We would have been honest and we would have said at the time, and we could have done something very valuable back then. We could have said to those people, we know that this industry is going to go, but we certainly don't want to forget how this industry works. We know that you are the people who have this maximum knowledge and experience about this sphere of activity. We need you and we're going to pay you until you retire because we certainly don't want to forget what you know. And I think that's one of the most important things. If I am going to attack an old business model with a new one, I replace the status quo. All that experience associated with the status quo has gone. I start from scratch. It's a bit like in the Roman Empire. The Vandals come along and throw out the Romans, replace the Roman Empire with the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, but I've forgotten about all these Roman fripperies, like how do you build a sewage system? And unfortunately, I've got the plague in my country, and I don't know how to prevent it or how to contain it, which I could have done. with this Roman knowledge, because the Romans knew why and how to build those sewage systems. We've lost half the population. What madness! How expensive it is to invest in really important things, human life, and resolving very unpleasant human situations, just by forgetting that one thing. So I think it's incredibly important to maintain that experience. And if we'd said 30 years ago, hey, you guys, we know your work is going to be done somewhere else, but you are the guardians of this knowledge and we're going to pay you for preserving that knowledge, then we would have achieved three things. Firstly, we would have given these people real meaning in their lives. We wouldn't have said, hey, we don't need your stuff anymore, it's going to be outsourced, we don't need it. We would have said, instead of making things, you're going to teach things, and that's important, and it is important. I gave you the example. The second thing we would have achieved is we would have understood these things better. We really wouldn't have forgotten this know-how. But now this is happening elsewhere. If people want to come back now, if we want to bring it back here because, I don't know, we want to send people to the moon and we want to send a steel industry with them, we wouldn't know how to do it. And it probably would have been a lot cheaper. And the money could have been invested in more important things rather than pretending that everything was fine. It would have been better for the environment too. Yes, it would have been better for everybody. And I think I see a huge opportunity here in artificial intelligence, economically anyway, because we have this opportunity for all these established companies that have so much experience and knowledge and passion as well. Look at the passion. Look at people who make cars. They love their cars. They love making cars. Recently I met one. He had the job. I don't even have a driving license, I can't see. But I went with a friend to collect his car, and there was someone polishing the car. And I asked this worker, I said, what's your job then? And he didn't say, oh, I'm just the polisher. He said, I produce the best cars in the world. You see? Happy person. And that attitude, we need that in more places. That's why I think that this being able to identify with something is really important. So maybe we can structure this a bit now. If you have artificial intelligence and you use that to carry out large parts of the processes we have now, it releases a lot of money and a lot of people to do service, innovation, brand, and develop a new business model. That's a good thing. Because it's happening now anyway. It's already happened. We can't sit down and say, no, we don't want Industry 4. It's happening already. The only question is, do we want it to hurt or not? And I think it makes more sense to say we don't want it to hurt. And anyway, we want to remain competitive here, please, because this is a very nice place to live. Social cohesion, peaceful, a lot of services, things work. We should say that. We want to preserve it. And I think that the politicians, the trade unions, everyone should get together because everyone can contribute. The politicians can create the regulatory framework for this new approach because at the moment the rules we have aren't new friendly. If Robert Koch had tried to develop medicine against tuberculosis these days, they'd have locked him up. At the same time, we've got the trade unions who advocate the rights of the working population, but they have this image of always preserving things. Okay, let's make them the preservers of the knowledge we have. That would be a new job for them. That would be great. And they also have the credibility that is needed for that, because if they don't have any other image, they have that. And then we, humans, could focus on passing on our knowledge and B, doing something new. And I think that with artificial intelligence, there are three big professions, really. Firstly, there's a small group of people who actually administer these machines and the data. We need them. The second group do something creative, something new, something bold. Either they actually create something or they're prepared to take a risk. might have been the inventors or explorers who got on a ship and sailed off to America. Now maybe they go to the moon. The third group, this is the most interesting thing, they will work people to people, service people to people. And I think that we as pack animals who like to integrate with other people, like to be with other people, you don't need to train for that for 15 years. It's something we like to do. You can still train people for it, of course. They can learn fantastic things. But it's something people can do. And maybe that's a way, an opportunity to close that huge gap we have now. Because nowadays it's decided at the age of 6 how much progress you're going to make in life. But if human beings have this basic criteria, they know how to deal with other people, everyone has that. You can build on that. And this could be a real opportunity to begin again. So I think artificial intelligence is a catalyst for this new beginning, which compared with all the other options we have is incredibly gentle. There is software that can take on at least half the work of lawyers, accountants, doctors, and so forth. This is not purely industrial work, where, like you say, researchers, experts have quite interesting things that they could then focus on more. So why is this diffuse fear of automation still there? Because we're not showing them where the future lies. We only show them, we basically show, don't worry, nothing's going to happen. But we don't explain what is going to happen. They know something's going on, and they don't really want to wait and see what it is. Instead of saying, look, this is what's going to happen, and this is how it's going to affect you, and these are your options, and your opportunities. Yes, there are only opportunities, there's nothing bad here. I want to come back to Arago. What do you actually do as a company? What spectrum of applications are you offering? What do you do? What can we imagine? With Arago, we have set ourselves the objective of offering a general artificial intelligence. That is a machine that if you give it enough knowledge and experience, it can do a lot of tasks for you. We're not quite ready with it, but we've made a lot of progress. That's Hiro. Yes, Hiro's the platform. That's the name of the platform. Our artificial intelligence is called Hiro. So we didn't just create the technology, we also thought about how can we roll this out? How can we do it? Because I'm not just going to plonk a loom in front of you and you know how to weave. No, it's not like that. We said, unlike a lot of other people riding on the crest of this wave, we have a plan for all-round implementation. And the plan is like this. The first thing you have to do is that you have to address data. You have to accept that data are basically the most essential component of your future. That means you have to work with structured and unstructured data and learn that it's important to organize that data semantically. Once you've got that message, the question is, how can you collect this data here? Because a lot of companies that have understood this, they've been collecting data for 15, 17 years. And it's not so easy to catch up if you haven't been doing that. So how can you collect data? There are two places where a company lets all the data flow through. One is finance and one is IT. We decided to go for IT because we said all the data appears here in real time. It's unstructured, okay, but we can do something with this. There are mathematical reasons why you might like to start there. I'm not going to go into detail, but it's statistically immaculate. If you start with IT, you have the advantage that most people, or strategists these days, believe that future comes from the technology. Most IT people, or most people in technology, spend 70 or 80% of their time maintaining the status quo. They should be looking at the future. So what we propose to companies, they can do anything they like with our artificial intelligence, but we suggest that they approach this strategically, understand that they need data, and we say, okay, first step, We'll look at your IT unit. We'll enable the machines to automate 80 to 90%. And it will look like a project that's quite familiar. It's a bit like outsourcing. Only this time you give the work to a machine. You can accustom yourself to this. You can go and watch it doing it. You can see how it happens. And you'll see there's nothing bad about it. It's okay. And then you have the advantage that you've started. It's paid for itself because you have this level of automation and it started to collect that data and structure it. That gives you the time to have the strategic discussion you need in order to develop your new business model and to carry out the training that you need for people to work with this. Once you've achieved that, you can start handing over your other processes to the technology. So we've begun to sell this IT administrator. We've said to people say to us, but you only do IT automation. What's that got to do with artificial intelligence? And we say, hang on a minute, we'll show you how this works. We take exactly the same machine that we were using for the IT and play a really difficult computer game. The yardstick of AI, if you like, these days. We play a game like Civilization. We used to play Go, but Civilization is much more complex than Go. So it's a better visualization of the real world than Go. Simply to demonstrate, look, this is the same machine. And it can do this, but it can also do this completely different thing here. Just to demonstrate it. And then you can move on and look at the other processes. You just mentioned that marginally. You were talking about learning. So what this machine can do is learn. It can feed itself with tasks and grow with the results. There are two ways to learn. One way to learn is to watch or try something out, simply do it, and then assess the outcome. And if it's good, I do it again. And if it's bad, I don't. That's trial and error. A lot of children do that. They look at how you can slot things into other things and whether it works. That's machine learning. And a lot of artificial intelligence these days is equated with that. But it's only part of it. The other part is learning the argumentation. So I explain to you how something works. You ask 5 questions about that. Why? Why is particularly important. Very important question. Yes, why has got us a long way in life. That's why humans have got to where they've got to. They ask why. And if I ask you, how does this work? And you say like this, and I say why, and you carry on explaining, imagine how much trial and error, how much failure I can save myself because I asked you that question. What did I do? I have tapped into your experience. And that's the difference, if you like, between our machine that quite deliberately integrates human knowledge. So it doesn't just do machine learning, it does that too. And I think that's really important, that we tap into that human knowledge. There's so much human knowledge and experience. Why should we do everything anew? No point to it. So with this machine, we work as system administrator, we play computer games with it, and all kinds of other things, just to demonstrate how it can be generalized. I have a question. We'll soon wrap up, but you are an enthusiastic supporter of classic education. Why do you think that a classic education is necessary? Because we could say, really, computers and artificial intelligence could take everything over. No, in classical education, the important thing is to understand across a broad spectrum of things. At some point, natural sciences and philosophy divided, but I think they're moving back together now. I think that's happening at the moment. But that led to a lot of breadth. You could address really abstract questions like, why am I here? Or very precise things like, how far is it to the sun and how quickly is it flying? I think if you want to be really creative and consciously take on risk, you need that breadth. Someone who can only do one thing very precisely, and a lot of training we have now is about that, can only improve the one thing they can do. They can make it a little bit better than that. It's always about efficiency, efficacy, but it's not about a new experience. So they understand the horse, so they won't build a car, because they understand the horse. So you have to give people really broad foundations and then release them into the world and say, please, think something new. How can they think something new if they don't have this broad platform? If they've always been trained to specialize, you mean? Yes, exactly, and that's why classical education, especially with people like you who are so competent and passionate about what they do and work so closely with algorithms and things, ultimately, the question is, what is really important in life? I think you have to do things that make you happy. And I think it would be very important if we moved away from our egocentric philosophy. There are two things, I think. You should pursue your own happiness. A lot of people try to separate their happiness and their work. You shouldn't have to do that. And the second thing is, it would be great if more people were to recognize that your own happiness has a lot to do with other people's happiness. And that brings us on to a very topical question, which is about cyber attacks, because we can't see them. I don't know if you've got 2 minutes for this. Can you say something about cyber attacks? Because that's really scary, and we have no control over it. Cyber attacks and cyber warfare are very unpleasant, frightening methods. Economically speaking too, because it's very easy to steal other people's ideas, and that is frightening. In social terms, I don't know how long we've already had the opportunity to grill our electronics with electromagnetic pulses, so we could certainly revert back to a previous age if we wanted to. We could dispense with all the infrastructure, we could knock it out. That's nothing new. In 70s, books were written about that. And people spent 20 years debating that. So that's not new. What's new is the small scale of it. That someone can capture your PC and say, give me a few €100 and I'll give you your PC back. But this is the old contest, cops and robbers. The robber gets ahead and the cops catch up. There's nothing new about it. I think this is a very important issue and something we certainly have to think about. But we have to be very rational about it. It doesn't help just to be paralyzed by shock. You really have to be rational and look at, what do we want to protect? What does it mean to me? How much convenience am I prepared to sacrifice for this? And if you can answer those questions, then you can come up with the techniques. You're not going to have a chance to live a life where you know you're going to survive, because you wouldn't choose that option. You're right. Thank you very much for your time and also for the work you've been doing. Thank you.